So John chapter 2, here we go. Jesus changes water into wine. This one is a fun one. You know me, I love a good wedding. And since Jesus made it his very first miracle, I do love a good wedding. Today we see Jesus's very first miracle, and it's turning water into wine. And he does it when he's not even ready, and only because his mama told him to. So why do you think that Jesus chose this as his very first miracle? Let's talk about that. John chapter 2, here we go. And you can look down in the description if you'd like to print out study cues for that. Study cues are just nudges, they are not homework. They are just nudging you or encouraging you to maybe dig a little deeper, to look under the surface of each of the passages that we're studying. It always starts at the top to pray for God to be with you as you read his word. And pray for him to open your eyes to anything he wants you to see. Then simply read the chapter. The first thing to do is, without any pretenses, without any thoughts, try to just read the passage and say, God, what do you want me to see out of it? And maybe jot a few of those things down. And then you get to reread the passage, and then we can start answering all of those questions. So let's just kind of dive in. It's not my goal here to answer every question or try to teach what the meanings of things are. I think what God is telling me to do is just be an encouragement to nudge people into discovering things on their own, to kind of point the way of, there's something here. You should dig into that. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a scholar. That is for sure. I have a reading disability, and I am just a child of God who is in love with my Jesus, and I just am hungry for the word, and I am learning right alongside you. So let's dig in and just see what God wants us to see today. So verse 1, on the third day, a wedding took place. Well, first of all, I love a good wedding. I do love a good wedding. On the third day, a wedding took place at Canaan in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." One of the things you're going to want to do is, number one, it's not weddings the way we see weddings. I see weddings all day long. I sew wedding dresses here in the sewing studio. And if anything, I know weddings, but I don't know these weddings, because these weddings had different customs. They were week-long celebrations. So to run out of wine, it wasn't like that evening was ruined. It's like the whole week of celebration. It was a disgrace. What would be a really fun search is to go look up the Jewish first century wedding customs or Jewish first century wedding traditions, and see why running out of wine is actually a worse deal than it would be for us. See about what that whole celebration was like. Verse 4, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." Now, my Bible actually at the bottom notes that the Greek for woman does not denote any disrespect. And that's important to know, because we have to read this the way the original audience read it and the culture. And that's really hard from a 21st century view, is that we would see woman, as kind of disrespectful. And why do you involve me? Almost like he's angry. But I don't think that that's the tone that he has. I think he's addressing her formally, and it kind of separates her being now more formally spoken to, not like he you were my mom and I was a child, but now I'm about my father's business. And so I think it's more of a formal, like a Mrs. or ma'am kind of a thing. Why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. That's a whole thing, because we're going to see over and over again Jesus say something like, my hour has not come, or my time has not come, or my time is here, my hour is now here. And so that's another little list that you can start to keep, to say, okay, when is his hour coming? When is his time? What does he mean by that? Like he wasn't ready to do a miracle yet. He wasn't ready to start his ministry at this point yet. And yet, God never allows anything to be wasted. So why did God allow this to be Jesus's first miracle? Why did Jesus make this his first miracle? Verse 5, his mother said to the servant, do whatever he tells you. You know, that's faith right there. You don't even know if he's going to do a miracle, but she just has confidence and faith and trust, knowing that he'll just take care of it, however it was. She may not have even known that it was a miracle that he was going to do. Maybe he was going to send somebody to run to the other town to get some wine, or to somebody's home to get some wine. Maybe he was going to take care of it in the physical sense, but she may not have known that it was a miracle he was about to do. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars. Note that. The kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. So that's a whole thing. Like, who's the master of the banquet? Is this like a wedding planner? Maybe? Master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheapest wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. So you've saved the best till last. Some of the translations say that. I like that. God always saves the best for last. I know growing up, people always said God waits for the 11th hour, or God's miracles or his answers always come in the 11th hour. But you have saved the best until now, or saved the best till last. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. So there's a few things interesting to look up, and one is the stone water jars. Why did Jesus use the stone water jars that were used for ceremonial cleaning or ceremonial washing? So if there's empty wine bottles or empty wine jugs, empty wine skins, whatever they use to hold wine, couldn't they have just scooped up water in those and he turned that to wine? Why did he use the ceremonial washing stone jars? And another thing that's really interesting is the stone jars themselves, because I have a really cool video and I'll put it down below. It's about a quarry that they discovered in Nazareth, I think it was. And it's because when they had clay jars, they had to be broken when they were ceremonially unclean. But the stone, they were able to actually keep that jar longer. And so Jews are one of the only people that actually made a lot of their jars out of stone and not out of clay. And usually in archaeology, if they find an archaeological dig and there's a lot of dishes and bowls, mugs, jars out of stone, they know that it's a Jewish community that lived there. So that's an interesting thing to go down and search. I'll put the archaeological little dig that Sergio and Rhoda actually went on to talk to the archaeologist because it's really, really interesting. And then also just the fact that Jesus turned the water that would have been used for ceremonial washing to turn it into wine. And I think that there is a real key here when Jesus is at the Last Supper and he holds up the wine and he says that this represents his blood that will wash away our sins. So there's something with the ceremonial jars, and there's something with the wine and Jesus's blood, and that is a really fun deep dive. Then we also see in verse 11 that what Jesus did here in Canaan of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. Here's another thing that you can start jotting down on your list. When John wrote his gospel, he actually put in 7 signs or miracles that lead up to his big miracle and the resurrection. So start noting this, because this is miracle or sign number 1. Another thing you can do here is you can look up locations. I love to look up the faces and the places. And so the event is the wedding, which is a really fun little dive to learn about. But then you have Cana in Galilee. I'll put a couple videos down in the description and also on the community page that are maybe people visiting Cana in Galilee. And then we see in verse 12, he's going to go into Capernaum. So he's going to start spending time in Capernaum, and that's another amazing little dig that you can do. You can actually see, I think it's Peter's house and where Jesus ends up staying, and they have found it and dug it up, and they built a church over top of it, which is really cool. Okay, our next little section here is Jesus clears the temple courts. Okay, verse 13, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Stop right there. There's 2 things you can look up. Number 1 is the Jewish Passover. What is a Jewish Passover? Why is it important? Why did John highlight this? And we're going to see throughout the book of John, he's going to use the feast or the Passover. There's other feasts that he's going to use as markers in Jesus's journey. So it's very important that he's using these. And then Jerusalem is a really fun look up. You can see some travel videos. It's so fun. Maybe see what the temple courts might have looked like, because the next verse, in the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, I have this underlined because this is a key thing that is an interesting thing to look up, because this is going to tell you why he was so angry. He said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "With zeal for your house will consume me." Let's talk about, first of all, selling doves and why that's important. Let's talk about the money exchangers. Let's talk about the selling doves, and let's talk about zeal. The marketplace was actually, I think it's actually in the courts of the Gentiles. And also, there is this little sentence in 16 that says, "Those who sold doves, he said to them." So it really narrows your focus. There's a reason why those who sold doves, he really got mad at. And you can actually find all of that in Leviticus 5:7 and Leviticus 12:8. What it is saying, and I'll give you a quick little sneak peek into it, is that those who would have been buying doves were actually the poor people. And you'll discover that in those passages. A really neat little side note is that when Jesus's parents, when Mary and Joseph bring Jesus as a baby to the temple to be dedicated or to go through his ceremony for 8 days after he is born, they bring as a sacrifice 2 doves, I think, or 2 pigeons. I think it was 2 doves. And this tells us that Mary and Joseph were poor. And you'll see the answer to that in those Leviticus passages. And then I had it somewhere written in here. There is a really cool part about when the disciples realize that zeal for your house will consume me. If you go and look up that passage, and I'm trying to find it right now, zeal. I think that is Psalms 69:9. So at Psalm 69:9, I did read that entire psalm. It was a really good psalm, but I didn't find anything especially standing out to me. But what I did find is that the second part of verse 9 really made me understand what Jesus was feeling. It says, "For zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me." Jesus was angry because if you look in the Old Testament, God made his temple, and before that it was his tabernacle. Remember we talked about Jesus came and dwelt last chapter. He came from earth and he took on flesh and dwelt among us, and that's the same word as tabernacle. God created over and over a way for humans to commune with him, to walk with him in the garden that was destroyed by sin, then to be the stairway between him. Jesus is the stairway between God and his people. But the temple in those days before Jesus had died on the cross was the place that they could come and meet God. And they could come and make atonement for their sins so that they could come and worship in his presence. And it was supposed to be a time of rejoicing. It was actually a festival. It was the festival of Passover, where they were remembering God's goodness, that the blood of the lamb over the doors had caused the death angel to pass over, and they were saved and they were set free from Egypt, and God brought them through the wilderness and brought them to the promised land, and he sustained them and protected them and guided them. And so that's what the temple was for. It was so that God could commune with his people, and they were coming together to celebrate and rejoice and feast and all of that in God's presence. And instead, the people were turning it into a marketplace. So look up some of the reasons why they had to exchange money and why they were actually stealing from the people. And after they exchanged the money, then those same people that had traveled all this way, then they would have to buy their sacrifice, because they didn't want to bring it on that long trip, because if it was a lamb or even a pigeon or a dove, it could have died on the way. And so it's a service that they were offering them so that they didn't have to bring their animals on this long journey. And yet they were stealing from them. They were stealing money at the point of them exchanging their money, their foreign money, for the temple money. They were charging them horrible fees. And then they were stealing from them and selling the doves to poor people for like twice the price that they were worth outside somewhere else. And so Jesus is angry, and he's upset because the original purpose, ask yourself, what was the original purpose for the temple, for God to meet with his people? What was God's original intent even in the garden? He was walking with the people. He wanted to walk and commune with them. He wanted them to be in his presence and have a relationship. And these thieves were standing in the way between the Gentiles, because their court was all a big mess, and the poor people who had to buy the doves. Okay, so now let's start in 18. The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do these things?" Why were they questioning his authority? Of course, they are part of the problem. They are standing in the courts, part of the selling and the stealing and making all kinds of rules that people had to jump through all these different hoops. So they were part of the problem, but they didn't think Jesus had authority. They did not think that Jesus had authority to stop them and all their crazy rules and regulations, and also all of the people at the markets, the merchants that were selling and cheating people. But they want some signs. What kind of signs do you think that they were asking for? What signs would have proved that he had authority? So verse 19, Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days?" So look up things like the temple history, and you'll see that the temple originally was built by Solomon in Solomon's time. David wanted to build it, but God would not allow him to build it because he had blood on his hands. So his son, Solomon, built it. And then the Babylonians come along and they take captive everyone because the nation of Israel had kind of turned away from God. His heart had always been to commune with his people, to hang out with his people, to have a relationship with his people. And they kept choosing other gods. They kept choosing other images. They worshiped gods that were not real instead of the true and living God who kept pursuing them. It's a love story that just goes on and on. But this temple gets destroyed when the Babylonians come. And then Cyrus, I think it is, in Persia, if I've got my facts right, he actually releases the Jewish people to go back and build their temple again. You'll find that in Ezra. And Nehemiah is about the walls around the temple. But then Herod the Great comes in and he actually makes that temple really beautiful. It's a really great little dig, a little side thing that you can go see what the temple looked like in each of those stages. So it's Herod's temple that actually has been taken 46 years to build. And in another part of the Gospels, I think some of the disciples are marveling at the beauty of it. It must have been grand. It must have been huge. It, kind of blew their mind as they came up to the temple. But Jesus is actually talking about himself as the temple, and that goes back to that word back in John 1:14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And that word dwelling is tabernacle, temple, booth, tent, to dwell with us. And so Jesus has come down to dwell with us, and he is now that temple of God, holding the power of God. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, the disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. So it'd be an interesting little dive to see what scriptures was he speaking. Is there some scriptures that actually connect to Jesus's words there? And the last little bit of chapter 2 is verse 23. Now while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, and now the Passover is in full swing, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Do you remember back in chapter 1 when he meets Nathanael, and he can actually see into Nathanael's heart, and he can actually see that Nathanael was under a tree when Jesus was nowhere around. That was pointing to the divine power to know what's in somebody's heart, and also the like omnipresence to see somebody and be there when he wasn't actually there. And so this sentence here in 2:24 and 25 is actually what they call a bookend to chapter 1 verses 43 through 48, right through there where he's talking to Nathaniel and saying, Nathaniel says, "How do you know me?" And he says, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree." And he talks about knowing what's in Nathaniel's heart. And here we see, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony. And there's the testimony. He didn't need their testimony. But there's a lot of testimony about him, about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. So a bookend, and we're going to see that even in this next chapter, is when a theme or a sentence or a phrase or something is repeated, and then you can actually mark it here and mark it here, and you can actually look this up online. Are these two bookmarks when you see something familiar? And you're going to see like a lot of extra information about that. Sometimes in the middle of a set of bookmarks, there's like a central theme somewhere in the center of that. And so just kind of keep that in the back of your head as you're seeing things repeat. Kind of write them down and note them, and maybe look up online. These two things sure sound a lot alike. Do these happen to be bookmarks? And you're going to be surprised at what you find. This one, actually, when I looked up the bookends between John 1:47 and 48 and John 2:25, it says it's showing Jesus' divine power to know both the individual and that his knowledge applies to all. So Jesus not only knows everybody individually, but he also knows everyone. So let's wrap up on that. Jesus knows it all. He has divine power. He has the power that is attributed to God. So the entire Old Testament, the scriptures, point to a lot of different attributes that only God can claim. And John is building a case showing that Jesus has those attributes. So start noting those. They are going to build up into a great case for Christ. So that wraps up chapter 2. We are just getting started. It is so good. I know you guys saw even more than I saw. I'd love to hear in the comments what else you found. Did you do a deep dive search on the word water or a deep dive search on the word wine? Did you look up Cana in Galilee or Capernaum? Did you look up the Jewish wedding traditions of the first century or the stone jars? I will put in some videos. Also, our community page is open to you guys if you want to share some cross references, some verses. You can also do it in this video's comment section. Love you guys, and we will see you next in chapter 3. Shalom.